Here is Nell Noddings, one of our beloveds, who wrote in her beautiful book, The Philosophy of Education. Dewey did not recommend abandoning the traditional subjects of the curriculum, so that gives us a job, music, but he wanted them to be taught in a way that makes them genuine subject matter. Genuine. They should be presented so that students can use them in purposefully working through some problematic situation. So there's a purpose to it, and it involves problems. Curriculum for Dewey is not a body of material established before instruction, looking at you people who make us do programs and lesson plans. It is the material gathered, used, and constructed during instruction and inquiry. 2 words there, not just instruction, but instruction and inquiry. Not clear who's doing the instructing and who's doing the inquiring, by the way. That would be assumption that we could dig into. So the whole point of this chapter, what is curriculum? How can curriculum be planned? What are the interrelationships between students, teachers, context, and curriculum? Let's just get that. Interrelated, students, teachers, context, and curriculum. So 4 things working together. What types of educational knowledge make up educatorship? Plan of the chapter. Well, as we know, the plan of the chapter is to take down Bennett Reamer and prove how clever Dave and Marissa are. And just really quickly, curriculum derives from the Latin word career. I'm just making up the pronunciation there. It meant several things: running a race, a course to be followed, a race course, and a career. And the time frame, according to Cicero. To many theorists, curriculum is a much more elaborate or multidimensional phenomenon because the what of education cannot be realistically decided apart from the why and the who. And because matters of when, where, and how inevitably circle backward and forward to teachers' decision about why, who, and what. So there you go. As Professor Rajolski would say, whether you like it or not, you're sliding into philosophy. And there are some rules to go by. And then there's a lot of blah, blah. So I thought I didn't want to get into the, Elliott and Silverman love to set up what it's not. So there's a bunch of what it's not. And the central premise is that historical conceptions, and even I would think we'd probably argue current conceptions of curriculum making, aren't conducive to good music education, according to D&M. So we get on to how teachers make curriculum, and many curriculum groups never stated objectives at all. And those that did generally did so near the end of their work as a way of expressing their purpose, or as I like to say, porpoise, to teachers rather than at the beginning as the fundamental starting point of their work. Dewey, of course, as with everything, anticipated these findings decades ago when he emphasized that educational objectives are not the prescriptions, they come pre, of learning, but rather the outcomes of teaching-learning. There is our dash. First dash of the chapter. Interactions. Whoa. Teacher-learning interactions. Objectives emerge in and achieve specification during learning transactions. So there's a lot of action words there, inter and trans. In other words, a teacher's decisions about the why, what, and how of teaching and learning cannot be realistically separated from, there we go, who, when, where, and so on. This is pretty key, I think, which is why it's a blue bombshell. Accordingly, preparation and planning processes are idiosyncratic. There's no predominant way of preparing and planning for teaching-learning situations. Because teaching does not occur in isolation, but in relation to and for students. A teacher's knowledge in action. So we're doing teaching, or taking part in a teaching-learning situation. A teacher's knowledge in action are what gives meaning to the teaching-learning situation. Just as musicianship and listenership depend on various types of thinking and knowing, and we talked about this when we talked about personhood, the different types of knowing: procedural, verbal, experiential, situated, intuitive, appreciative, ethical, and supervisory, so too does teaching. That's a lot to dig into there. So now we get to good teaching. Expertise, which is a dangerous word. To possess teaching expertise is to possess a working understanding of teaching-learning situations. The word working emphasizes the practical, it's in practice, situated, which means it's in a place, and improvisatory, yes, nature of teaching. From this perspective, expert teaching is much closer to improvising over changes than rendering an accurate reading of a score, a step-by-step lesson plan. Teachers trade, quote, feedback with students in a kind of call and response pattern characteristic of jazz, improvising. An expert music teacher, like an excellent improviser, deals with moment-to-moment problems and opportunities on the fly. These problems and opportunities, that's really key there, right? Problems and opportunities are both musical and educational in nature. That's really important. The 2 kinds of problems, musical problems and educational problems. The professional music educator is well prepared to solve musical, so we're talking now about our musicianship, and educational problems, our educatorship, in action, on the spot, as it's happening in real time in front of us. Because we might probably put they possess 3 complementary forms of expertise. Yeah, I've given it away. Musicianship, listenership, and educatorship. But educatorship is a working understanding, so it's something that happens in the moment. It's flexible, context-based knowledge that allows one to think in action in relation to students' needs, subject matter criteria, community needs, and the professional standards that apply. It's inclusive of the educative potentials of teaching and learning situations. Many of these potentials come from further understanding of the positive and negative effects of the various forms of curriculum. According to Leslie Wilson, they include but are not limited to. And so we get here to the in, about, and through that Elliott and Silverman are talking about. Have a look at these. There's the overt, explicit, or written curriculum. That's the stuff. Students will complete worksheets on crotchets and quavers. Societal curriculum, what we want the students to be able to do in society. There's the stuff that students pick up that we don't actually say, but through our actions and through what's put in and put out, that speaks to the phantom curriculum. It's the curriculum you don't see, but it's like a ghost lurking around. And some other ones as well. And Professor Rajolski talks about the types of curricula that are going on in our classroom. And again, I think you'd probably say whether you like it or not, there's stuff going on that's not necessarily written down and not necessarily with a NISA badge on it. And the administrative curriculum, which we're seeing in New South Wales at the moment, is writ large and is taking over lives. Look at this. This is beautiful. Educative, effective, efficient, ethical, and joyful teaching. Yes. Exhibits itself in a teacher's judgments about the kinds of knowings and types of curriculum that's most appropriate or desirable for students to experience, and the kinds of teaching strategies that it's most appropriate to use in helping students develop these knowings and experiences. We're not merely intermediaries in a delivery system. We're reflective practitioners who can think in action and know in action in relation to highly complex and fluid teaching learning situations. Fluid is a good word. Most efforts in curriculum making continue to perpetuate the acontextual. This will work for everybody. Everybody needs to know this. National standards, national curriculum, impersonal, dualistic notions of technical rationality. This is what students should be able to do sort of approach. Accordingly, there are good reasons to believe that conventional curriculum making is problematic for, if not hostile to, the essential nature of music education and the process of preparing and planning for music teaching and learning. So then they set out an alternative called practical curriculum making. When teachers focus on their own circumstances, getting back to Professor Rajolski's what can I teach effectively and well, rather than generic scripts. And the interests of practical curriculum making lie in shifting away from technical rational notions of teachers as retailers to teachers as reflective practitioners, away from specification, away from measurement and testing. In sum, and in opposition to curriculum doctrine, practical curriculum making places the teacher as reflective practitioner at the centre. So there we go. We've got the teacher at the centre of curriculum development rather than NISA, I guess. So then they talk about curriculum commonplaces. As far as we can work out, if you're going to try to put together some stuff to do, some gigs, you're probably going to have what Schwab came up with, aims, knowledge. So what do we hope to get out of it? What knowledge do we hope to get? And remember, there are knowledges. Who are the learners? And how are we going to do it? Learners, who are the teachers? How are we going to assess? And they talk about assessment. How are we going to assess the efficacy? Did anyone learn anything? There might be teaching going on. Was that effective? How do we know? Did anyone learn? And the context. So what container will we put all of this learning in? The commonplaces are open categories. They remain empty until filled in by each teacher's, here we go again, beliefs, understandings, intentions, and actions. In other words, there are many ways to conceptualize these commonplaces, as there are philosophies, theories of educational psychology, ideologies, and so on. But how often have we heard that? In my experience, curriculum and programming is just the orthodoxy, objectives, and such. The curriculum is something that teachers and learners experience in specific situations as a result of the interactions between and among curriculum commonplaces. So you can have aims, but even if we had the same aims, we don't have the same learners, and we don't have the same teachers. So there's just 3 ways that things can go off the tracks. And then 4 stages of curriculum making. orientation. And in the orientation stage, it's all of these questions that we keep asking as gig-based learners. What are the aims? What do they mean? What's the nature of the knowledge I'm trying to teach? What's involved in developing? How should I think about my role as a teacher? How should I conceive the roles and responsibilities of the students? How will I assess or will I evaluate? What's the difference? What's the most appropriate context for it? And so forth. They're the sorts of things, and Pete and I have been making fresh gigs lately, and we've been thinking a lot about those things. And that is stage one. We orientate ourselves and we wrestle with these things. And at this point, for me, the answers are up here and my eyes roll back a little bit and I start to picture myself and my students in context and rehearse in my mind, in my mind's eye. At this stage involves preparing and planning. We seek a general framework. I just yellowed this because I wanted to get to the green. In terms of an early comparison, written plan is to teaching as chord changes are to a jazz improviser. Requiring teachers to write ultra-specific scripts is analogous to demanding that jazz improvisers explain every detail of their improv. Teaching, like improvising, is a matter of knowing in action, not mechanical reproduction. Like improvisers, music educators engaged in specific teaching learning situations exhibit their musical and educational expertise in relation to all of that stuff that we've talked about. This is what Pete and I have tended to do over the last 10 years. We do the gig and we write it down. So some teachers find it useful to write a summary lesson plan after the episodes are complete. We grow and plan by reflecting on his or her thinking in action after the fact. We do that step one: dream, imagine, execute, improvise, reflect, and write that down. And that informs the next iteration of that gig or the next gig, rather than let's just get the bare bones of this and test it, because we'll learn so much more if we just enter the classroom and riff. But sometimes we have to write them down, right? Lesson plans are neither guarantees nor binding contracts where students are concerned. So even when we take those detailed lesson plans into the classroom, as a professional music educator, we're still improvising. And we've talked about this a lot. To Robert Yinger, or maybe Yinger, if he's an Australian, sure. Bold Yinger. The most appropriate image of teaching comes from the root sense of the word itself, to show or demonstrate. I like the idea of pointing, and we've talked about this. Hey, check this out. You're going to love this. What do you think of this? And to show or demonstrate. So I think a lot as a music educator, I think about the root word to being, to point to. Yes, that's where our professional energy belongs. Showing, opening up opportunities. Yes, designing particular kinds of teaching learning contexts. Good job, syllabus writers from back in the day. So hip, you know. Holy heck. Designing particular kinds of teaching learning contexts, some people might call them gigs, in which particular kinds of actions, transactions, and interactions can take place productively and enjoyably. Feel successful, have fun with friends. This is what one-dimensional linear plans can't capture. In your face, linear plans. Stage 3, then we do it. An excellent curriculum is an excellent teacher interacting with students in educationally sound ways. And then stage 4, evaluate. So what is a praxial music curriculum? Curriculum making, which should be developed with, for, and because of. That's a really tricky one and challenging. With, for, and because of. Without students, there's no teachers. Specific teaching and learning situations ought to be created with critical reflection, stop the clock, imagination, and simultaneous renewal. Simultaneous renewal. That's like on the spot. Somebody just played a sharp 11 on a 7 chord. Bam! And you weren't expecting it, but you've been in the shed and you hear it and you respond. Stages, yes. And so now they just walk us through the curriculum commonplaces. So you'll see these from before, the aims and the knowledge. These are pretty awesome aims. We won't go through them all because there's a lot, but imagine a world where we're walking into the classroom and we're not thinking about, gee, I hope the students can smash out the rhythm pyramid. It's cool, but it's not our aim. It's a means, but not the end. So personal meaningfulness, interconnectedness, social capital, empathy, ethical maturation, self-growth, self-knowledge, and flow are values of musics. That's what we get out of musicking, and therefore are the aims of music education. That's probably worth a green, right? Because we've spent a whole book going, what are the natures and values of music? And they've just laid them out right there. So what are the goods of musicking? It's these things. And so what should be the goods of music education? These things. We don't have to make stuff up. Music education as and for praxis promotes amateuring. By this he means that learning and teaching and active musical doing in a practicum context nurtures the sheer love of music and sharing it with like-minded others. that is a principal value in the life well lived. So they're using the word amateuring there in a way that Bennett Reamer also uses when he talks about aficionados, amateurs and professionals. And amateurs are people that pursue music passionately and carefully and enthusiastically, and they do their very best to make the very best music. They just don't get paid for it. Yes, this great stuff from Howard Gardner, who's a heavy cat. So right here, verbal musical knowledge is secondary to the doing knowledge, because we can get caught up in what verbal knowledge at this point. These things are all human doings, and for us as praxialists, it's about the doing. Most educative curriculum for the best music students is the best curriculum for all music students. Yay! Namely, a music curriculum based on as many forms of expressive musicking and listening as possible. Just opens up something that we can talk about ad nauseum, about this insistence of we've got to get our gifted and talented musicians, we need to focus on them, and then we lose everybody else. So at the end of year 8, 4 people go on to study elective music, which isn't a bad thing, as long as everybody else goes, thank you, I want music to be a part of my life. Going on to study elective music is just one part. This is that thing about what happens in high school, and all of a sudden we go from having fun and making music to worksheets and such. Just because older students may have more facility with verbal concepts doesn't mean that general music programs should shift their focus from music making to historical, theoretical, or listening-based appreciation programs. And then the learning process, an essential part, is to teach students how to continue developing their musical understanding in future and for the rest of their lives. This philosophy has suggested the process of developing musical understanding is a particular kind of learning process that students can both engage in and learn how to employ themselves. So this is the whole idea of teacher fades, this idea of musicianship and educatorship. Both things are critically reflective practices. That's something that we do as critically reflective musicians and critically reflective educators, but we also hope to inculcate or to mentor or to develop in our students. So as we go along, the idea is not what did you think, teacher, but teacher asking, what did you think? Similarly, when we slide into philosophy about music education, we slide into what have the cats played when they play Have You Met Miss Jones? I don't know where that example came from, but anyway, could have been Ghanaian drumming. All music students should be engaged in rich and challenging music-making projects, some people call them gigs, in classroom situations deliberately organized as close approximations. Repeat, approximations, not duplications of real musical praxis. I think that's an interesting one. We can talk about that as well. This is the in, about, and through. Effective and educative teaching is exemplified in a combination of procedural knowledge that draws on verbal experience and all of that other stuff. So then there's this really heavy but cool picture of what's going on for us as professional music educators. Theoretical knowledge about teaching is inert. It ought to be viewed critically and continuously growing. And I think this is like you've got your copy of the real book at home and you've checked it out and you're deep into it, but you hope that you haven't got to pull it out for every lesson and read from it. And you keep going back. Each year you read an extra jazz theory book or something. That's the theoria, not the praxis. They're inscribed and embodied. And they talk about teachers, just because we can't explain it with words doesn't mean we can't do it in action, and it's not part of who we are. Effective, ethical, and educative teachers, everything they do will have an impact on students. Believe educating the whole child means the whole child. Ready, willing, and able to secure teaching and learning encounters that contribute to the student's sense of physical, social, emotional, moral, and spiritual well-being. Teaching through music and empathy, as we've talked about before, in line with contemporary care ethics, feeling what another is feeling. So there's that, the ethical component, empathetic component. It's a matter of disposition. Some might call it the vibe. Some might say Marbo, and then they might say, no, it's the vibe of knowing to, knowing when to, knowing whether to, and so on. There's some pretty sick ideas there. Perhaps the most important part of music teachers' supervisory educational knowledge is his or her valuing of expressive praxis. Musical values in music teachers beget musical values in students. Yes, a disposition. Teachers should consider students' musical goals and desires and support the advancement of musicianship and listenership. They must help their students bear in mind the importance of care, revision, reflection, discipline, critical reflection, persistence, and sharing dialogues with others. Taken together, such strategies can create, learning communities where every member cares about achieving his or her creative potential. Holy moly, who wouldn't want to be a music educator? Some stuff here about assessment versus evaluation, joint responsibility of teachers and students. Oh boy, we haven't talked about this much, have we? But holy heck, for Pete and I, it's all about the students. That peer marking that we do with them is so rich because we've just been through that whole what's the point? We're trying to become critically reflective persons, and we practice that through being critically reflective musicians and critically reflective teachers and learners. And then why wouldn't you then involve your students in the assessment? Because that's the whole point. We're trying to evaluate ourselves and evaluate each other in community. But then we see so often students will submit work. Teacher goes off, drinks red wine at night, and talks about how they don't actually really get as many more holidays than other people because they have to do marking all the time, which is fine, at the hairdresser, but big dodge as a praxeolist. Yes, look at that. Oh, this is so great. Different kinds of know-how are contextual in a larger sense that knowledge needing to do something well may be distributed. You look at the members of the Rolling Stones by themselves. Fine and everything. When they come together, they're the Rolling Stones. It's distributed, often a team of accomplishments as opposed to being completely resonant in the mind of one person. It's networking. And then look, here's that word, welcome music students. We're welcoming, conceive them as critically reflective music listeners, and they're coming into this as a social praxis, and we're connecting them with other musical role models, aka the cats, and practitioners. Actions, transactions, interactions, immerses. Look at these beautiful words. When music and listening in small and large performing ensembles, developed and carried out, principles discussed here, space and place, situated music classroom becomes a reflective musical practicum. And that's where we're getting to. Classroom music education as reflective musical practicum. We reflect, we think about it in action and after. It's musical and it's practical. But we would say praxial because we're very careful about care and acting ethically. And look, holy heck, all those years ago when we said, welcome to show business, musical practitioner, I'm so proud of us. I don't know how we knew how to do that. Teaching all students how to find and solve musical problems in conversations with that musical praxis. Music educators situate students thinking, musical thinking knowing. Yes, and that's how things come together. So the whole chapter just comes down to these 3 words for us to take away. Reflective, musical, practicum.